Hello, well done for finding us here. Welcome to the audio miracles of Zoom. And from your responses so far, it sounds like some of you have also had a certain love hate relationship with Zoom and its ilk over the past year or so. I'd heard of Zoom before then, but I hadn't used it. So uh, I've like a lot of people. It's been great to have some semblance of a social life during lockdown through the likes of Zoom, and I've also done plenty of teaching and work meetings and the like through Zoom as well. So it's been a real savior of the last year, but it does have its foibles as well. Um, this is one of our very professional singing teachers, Jenny Burke being her ever professional self during a singing lesson. So our singing teachers have been able to continue giving lessons all the way through lockdown without ever seeing their students. But it does have its features. Your poll results were fairly similar to my very small number of Twitter followers, who also really didn't like glitchy sound, found that a real problem. Echoes is my personal bugbear. I can't stand echoes if they're there. And also, it drives me mad in a meeting if I say something and people don't even know that I have said it because I'm at that point very inaudible. So Zoom does have its issues, but at the same time, it's kind of a real modern miracle. And I think I wanted the emphasis of this to be on what it is doing well the vast majority of the time, because as you'll see, the more surprising thing isn't that it has problems, but that it doesn't have these problems all of the time. So I kind of wanted to ask, why isn't it worse? And also, like, what can we do to help it help us? So I don't want to say that all of the problems are our fault, but we can make Zoom's life a bit easier with some of our choices. So just a few caveats at the start. I'm saying Zoom most of the time, but I sort of mean audio conferencing software more generically. Just audio conferencing software is quite a mouthful that I'd prefer to avoid. And also, I'm being even lazier than that, in that Zoom lives in your computer. Your computer is attached to lots of peripherals. I more care about how the whole system works together. So when I say Zoom, sometimes your computer itself deserves some of the blame, some of the credit. But yes, in many ways, we don't need to pick them apart because if the problem is there and we can get rid of it. And I should also say that I don't work for Zoom. I've never spoken to anyone who works at Zoom, and I don't have access to their audio manuals. So a lot of this is, I suppose, general knowledge of audio, finding out what I can, and doing a few tests, a small amount of reverse engineering about what's going on in Zoom. Why am I doing it then? Well, I guess for the last year or so, I've really wanted somebody to do this talk. I thought somebody needed to do it, and eventually realised that I work at the Sonic Arts Research Centre, where we use lots of tech for sound all the time. It's what we deal with, and it eventually crossed my mind that if one of us isn't going to do it, sort of who is. And I've been very aware of the challenges in particular that music teachers have had in the last year. So there's a bit of an emphasis as to sort of stretching what Zoom can do in order to play music using Zoom. So welcome to the Audio Miracles of Zoom. I'm Trevor Agus. I'm a hearing researcher in SARC at Queen's University Belfast. And for those who like to know what's coming up, here's a quick summary. Lots of these are just terminology that you probably, if you're a normal person, you have not come across before. That's absolutely fine. The main point of this screen is to say that when I start talking about latency and filling gaps, we're nearly at the end. Okay, so that's the main thing you need to take away from this. Um, so to dip our toes into this, oh, and I meant to say, at the end, I'll wrap this up into a summary sort of audio hygiene of what we kind of ought to be doing when we're on Zoom, if we can, to the extent that's possible for us. So to dip our toes into some of the little miracles that Zoom is doing for us without us fully appreciating it. I suppose this session at the moment is a bit like broadcasting. This could be radio, this could be very low budget television, but a big difference is that I don't have a sound engineer here, so it's just me. Craig Jackson has had a very well deserved day off, and that means that Zoom needs to do some of the work that a sound engineer would normally do. So it would normally, for a talk like this, I would say, I would be there half an hour beforehand, checking the mic levels, doing the whole testing, 1, 2, 3 thing, and the sound engineer would change the level on my audio, and that's what Zoom has effectively done for me at the start of this meeting. So it's kind of tried to judge the level of my softly spoken voice, and tweak the level a bit so that it's hopefully all right from where you're sitting. And this isn't as easy as it sounds, because sometimes there are silences. Okay, and if the system was too reactive, it might amplify this passing car rather than just focus on my voice. So it's not as trivial as it might seem, which is why I think most of our broadcasting corporations still prefer to employ real live sound engineers to do a good job of it. But for most of the time when we're talking, I think Zoom does a pretty good job of making us audible. If you have tried to sing or play the trumpet down Zoom, then you might hit some more problems. And that's partly because, well, the levels are very different, so the trumpet's much louder than my voice. But also that singing even is a very different type of sound from speech. So it's just going to be a bit more of a challenge for Zoom to work out what level it should be at. So if you want to do something like singing or playing the trumpet down Zoom, not if you're just talking, but if you're doing something a bit different, then I guess we need to take responsibility to become our own sound engineers. You can turn off the option of automatically adjusting the microphone volume. And you can adjust your microphone level yourself, and even do simple things like standing further away from the microphone could help when doing something like playing a trumpet. Okay, so that's all very well for me talking to you at the moment, and hopefully am I at a comfortable audible level? That's right. You're all muted, and that's because there's no way I'm going to let you make this run too much over 30 minutes. So you're currently muted, but in a normal Zoom conversation, this would be a two-way thing, and it should well become a two-way thing during the Q&A session afterwards. If you have a question, by the way, you can fire it into the chat of this Zoom session, and we'll pick it up afterwards. Okay, so in a two-way scenario, the sound gets a bit more complicated, because as I talk, the sound goes into my microphone, and if you're using a laptop or something, your microphone might be hidden. I'd have no idea where my laptop microphone is, but it's in there somewhere, even if it doesn't look like this one. So it goes down the microphone, through your computer, through your router, dear knows what else, magically makes it across the internet to another person's home, another person's loudspeaker, and they get to hear the voice. So far, so like a broadcast scenario, except that the loudspeaker sends the sound willy-nilly all around your room, including straight back to your microphone. So what you would expect to happen is that the sound then does exactly the same journey back across the internet, uh, back to me, and I hear my voice with a bit of a time delay. So, and this is just because your computer hears both you and the loudspeaker that's in your room. So, by rights, um, echoes should be the norm. We should have echoes all of the time, and Zoom is doing something clever to prevent this. And one of the things it's doing, it's not the only trick it has, but one of the tricks it has is echo cancellation. And this simply means that it is taking the echo that it expects to get and it is subtracting that echo from the sound. Um, this is as simple as 2 minus 2 equals 0, an echo minus an echo equals silence. And it takes us back to sort of the more broadcast scenario where the sound is traveling one direction, except that both people could speak at the same time, and their sound would take a single journey to the other side without doing the return journey. So that's the joys of echo cancellation. Just to put a bit more meat on those bones, how do you subtract two sounds? How do you subtract one sound from another? Well, if we look at what sound is a rapid series of fluctuations in air pressure, just tiny changes in air pressure, such that we go from a little bit more pressure, a little bit less, a little bit more, and the precise pattern of the changes here is sort of characteristic of the sound that we're listening to. And if you wanted to cancel out this sound, then all you need to do is play an equal and opposite sound. So we need another sound that dips down in pressure and then increases in pressure at all of the opposite places of the original sound. So that as these are added together, they sort of do a bit of a tug of war with both teams doing different things, but neither side winning ever. And if neither side wins ever, then we have no changes to the air pressure, and we get silence. So this works great on paper. But then if you take it into the real world, I'm sure it's not your experience that if you take one violinist and find another violinist, that there's a risk of them cancelling out. So even Joanna Petko isn't a precise enough violinist to exactly cancel out another violinist. Such a level of precision is required to get all of these fluctuations exactly lined up. And it's a bit easier for Zoom, but not so easy. Per Zoom, I guess, needs to factor in the level differences. So, Dear knows what level the sound is coming out of your loudspeaker and what is reaching your microphone. But also the loudspeaker and the mic could be distorting the sound. And the sound will bounce around your room. So there'll be a certain amount of room reverberation that also reaches your microphone. So it's a really tricky job for Zoom to cancel out these echoes. And what would normally happen quite reasonably is you get a little ghost of an echo that would still come back to the listener. So it's pretty hard to eliminate these echoes entirely. So there's a few more things that you can do and Zoom can do to get rid of these echoes. And one really simple thing is to turn down the volume. So if you're blasting the sound out of your loudspeaker during a conversation, then potentially there's a much bigger echo to get rid of in the first place, and it's going to be more difficult to do. Zoom is wise to this, so it also factors this. It seems to factor this into its automatic gain control. So that's as well as finding the right level for you to be heard well. It can also use this tweaking of your level just to get rid of echoes. So you might find that when one person is doing a lot of the talking in a meeting or in a conversation, that everybody else's microphone level is turned down quite a bit. And I think that this is probably primarily to get rid of these annoying echoes. This isn't without its problems. It's kind of not that normal for one person to speak at a time. In real life, we sort of go, yeah, and we try and jump in on top of the other person's sentence, and it's not rude, it's not interrupting, it's just a perfectly normal part of a healthy conversation. So it's not ideal that only one of us can talk at a time, but it's better than echoes. If you wanted to help Zoom and not trust its automatic gain control, you could take control of the situation by muting yourself. So if you're in a big meeting with lots of people, like we are now, it's pretty healthy to have the people who aren't speaking muted. That gets rid of their background noise, but it also prevents us from having this kind of figure of eight that could lead to lots and lots of echoes. And some of you may be ahead of me in this one. Another trick we could use is wear headphones for it. So that doesn't work if there's 2 or 3 of you sharing the same laptop, same device. But if you're by yourself, then you could hopefully put on a pair of headphones. And that just means that the loudspeaker is effectively right next to your ear and the microphone can't hear it. So then there's no longer any figure of eight to break, and there's not even a risk of an echo. So that would be very good audio hygiene. And I guess the reason I like the term audio hygiene is that if you're the person causing the echo, then you're not necessarily the person who hears the echo. It's the other person talking at the other end who hears echoes of themselves. So I guess if you have the option of wearing headphones or taking any of these steps to avoid creating an echo, it is good audio hygiene to do so. And it's not worth being too paranoid about, but just every little bit helps and prevents us from being the problem in a meeting. So Zoom is clearly tweaking the sounds that we make in ways that are intended to be helpful and are often helpful, even if they have some downsides as well. And it does other things to tweak the sounds, but to explain those, I need to take a slightly different perspective on what sound is. So this is a Aegis original analogy for how speech sounds, in fact, how any sounds work. So when we speak, we sometimes create high frequencies and sometimes create more low frequencies. But it wouldn't be right to think of speech as having a frequency at any point. Rather, it has lots of things going on at different frequencies at the same time. And I think of this a bit like being a musical fountain, where each fountain, in a sense, acts nearly independently and sends up different amounts that change over time. And it's the pattern that we see on the musical fountain here that represents what speech is, it represents what a sound is. So in order to understand speech, we need to be able to sort of pick apart the musical fountain and recognize the patterns in it. And it turns out that the mid frequencies are particularly important for understanding speech. So round about sort of 2,000 to 4,000, maybe 5,000 hertz are really important for understanding what somebody is saying. So it seems like a no-brainer that Zoom would give these a bit of a boost. And I believe this is what's called equalization, even though it's kind of doing the very opposite. I think it should be called unequalization because it's giving speech an unfair advantage. And I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing for other things like music as well. I think they'll probably survive this process fine. Another tweak that Zoom, and in fact any MP3 makes, is it largely gets rid of the highest frequencies. So these very high frequencies, I'm talking like sort of above 6 to 8 thousand hertz, are pretty subtle. So they don't make such an obvious difference. Um, some of us probably haven't heard them for a decade or two. And they're also very expensive, in the sense that because high frequencies can change so fast, there's a lot goes on at high frequencies. And the top couple of octaves of our hearing range, would easily take up the vast majority of our internet bandwidth. They would really make our computer work hard. They'd make our router work hard, much harder than it needs to. So why don't we just remove them as well? And I think I might lose a few audiophile friends by saying that this probably doesn't matter too much. I think stuff that sounds rubbish with medium quality audio will still sound pretty rubbish with high quality audio. And if something sounds great with high quality audio, it'll generally sound pretty okay with medium quality audio as well. But if you want to get some of these high frequencies back, not all of them, but some of them, you can now use a high fidelity music mode in Zoom. It's one of the options there, and you get back some of this high quality audio. It'll make your router work a lot harder. So only do this if you have a really good internet connection. Um, so um, uh, so I wouldn't necessarily do this just for the high frequencies that I say are kind of a bit of a bonus, but also when you turn on high fidelity music mode in Zoom, it changes the way the equalization works. It changes the way the automatic gain works, so that you can have a greater dynamic range for your piano playing, for example. And when you play a long note that should fade out, it doesn't end up getting boosted again a bit later to compensate for the fact it's getting quieter. And this high fidelity music mode also switches off noise reduction. And we haven't talked about noise reduction yet, but it's one of the most cunning things that Zoom does, and actually a lot of hearing aids do as well. And if we go back to this fountain analogy here, if we saw that one of these fountains was always on, no matter what the rest of the pattern was doing, we might start to suspect that it's not, after all, speech, because speech doesn't have these persistent sounds. Speech tends to have lots of gaps and silences that it constantly changes. So if Zoom sees any steady, persistent power in the sound, it's probably not speech. And again, thinking that Zoom's primarily designed for us talking to each other, it makes perfect sense to just get rid of it. I've got some nice recordings done with whatever devices we had in the house. I played a few artificial sounds through Zoom and recorded what came out the other side. So if we turn the noise reduction down to low, then you can hear pretty much the same boring sounds that I played into it. I'll play them for you now. And there's another quieter one. So that's 1,000 hertz pure tone for those who care. But just it's a very fixed fixed note. And if we turn the noise reduction, you can do this in the audio settings. If you turn the noise reduction up to medium, then you can already see from this diagram of what happens over time that we're going to hear something very different. So this is what we hear with even medium noise reduction. So I think in all likelihood you probably couldn't hear that very quiet ringing that did continue. I can just hear it here from the best listening position. But you can see on the diagram that we initially get the sound of this pure tone, but then it almost entirely cuts out, which is incredible, really, really impressive processing, to virtually nothing for the rest of the pure tone. And even more incredible to me, nearly 2 seconds later, when the second pure tone starts, the level is still way down for this specific pure tone. And all of this is happening while you could equally be having a conversation at the same time. So you can see that certainly medium levels of noise reduction can really mess with the sound. Now, imagine if you were a piccolo player playing a top A or something. That's not too different from this particular sound. And so you can sort of start to imagine how these very helpful noise reduction techniques that could help get rid of traffic noise and the hum of a fan could really mess with your music lesson and cause lots of trouble. So noise reduction is a bit of a double-edged sword. If you even turn the background noise down to low, it won't be so drastic. And if you are willing to use up your bandwidth, you can choose high fidelity music mode. And one of the many things that it does is switch off this background noise suppression, so it's not messing with your sound. So the last little miracle that Zoom does involves latency. So latency, I haven't mentioned this, I glossed over this earlier, but as I'm talking to you now, there's not really like a constant stream of sound that's being sent over the internet. Rather, the sound is being packaged up into little boxes. And when one box is finished, it's processed, sent on through my router over the internet, and eventually turns up at your house. Seamlessly, the next box is filled up, packaged up, and sent on. So we have lots of little discrete bundles taking their independent routes across the internet. And this takes time. So at each step of the way, there's a bit of a time delay. And Zoom recommends that in order to have a conversation, it's probably best to have under 150 milliseconds of latency, which is the posh word for lateness. Okay, so that's the time it takes for between me talking to the sound turning up in your ears. 150 milliseconds seems like pretty much nothing. It's a small fraction of a second. But on the other hand, there is a bit of a difference between somebody saying yes and somebody saying yes. So like these tiny time delays on the order of hundreds of milliseconds do have linguistic meaningfulness. If somebody responds with a bit of delay, they might seem less excited. They might seem like they had to think about it before they reply. So I think this could be partly why Zoom conversations can be a bit disconcerting when they start. But we do quickly get used to it to a large degree. So, we adapt to whatever the latency is, we seem to anyway. But this doesn't work out quite so well for playing music over Zoom. I don't know how many of you, hasn't everyone, tried singing Happy Birthday over Zoom with a large number of people? And it quickly gets very out of sync. And that's because of this 100 or 200 milliseconds of latency. There's a bit of a time delay between us, and we're each trying to follow each other. So it just falls over and we collapse in a big heap in audio terms. So it's no good for playing music. The number bandied about on the internet for how good your latency needs to be before you can play music is about 40 milliseconds. Again, a stupidly short amount of time. To try and give some sense of what this means in the real world, we can do a bit of GCSE physics. How far would sound travel in 40 milliseconds. So if we're 40 milliseconds away from somebody, how far does that involve us standing? So 0.04 seconds is 40 milliseconds, if I've done my sums right. And the speed of sound is 340 meters per second, give or take. And that works out as 13 or 14 meters away. So by my rough estimates, that's about the width of the Ulster Hall stage. And I guess it's true, we could perform together from the far side of the Ulster Hall stage, but even 40 milliseconds might not be that comfortable. So again, at the moment, this really isn't looking good for Zoom choirs. Even though they are continuing, this is the Queen's University staff choir who met and had a good sing-song yesterday afternoon. And they're singing together, but I believe they're mostly on mute. Because they're not quite singing all at the same time. So they're not getting that ensemble experience. Zoom can't quite do that. But there is hope. And there's hope in software that currently exists. It's just currently maybe a bit too hard to use for everybody. But there's a little plug. Tomorrow week, Professor Paul Stapleton and Adam Melby and another colleague in England will be performing live. They'll be improvising live. Their group is the Three Body Problem. They'll be performing from Belfast, Newcastle and Berlin simultaneously with no safety net. And Craig assures me that there is hope over the internet of getting latency down to using Sonobus, this other piece of software for audio, high quality audio conferencing. There's hope of getting down to about 15 milliseconds. Again, relating that back to rail terms, that works out at about 5 meters away from somebody. And to be honest, I could imagine on a rail stage, in a real scenario, us voluntarily choosing to stand, 5 meters away from our accompanist. It's not ideal, Gail, but it is. It could easily be done. So I think there's real hope of us being able to play in duets and trios, and Sonobus says up to 10 to 15 people at the same time. So small choirs could get together again. Melisma, see you on Monday. Except that there is maybe still a few technical challenges, so it's probably not worth investing the time to set this up unless you're willing to spend a bit on your sound card, on your audio equipment, and work out anything that's adding the time delays. For example, if you use Bluetooth headphones, that could add 250 milliseconds, which defeats the purpose of using Sonobus in the first place. So you probably need to be a bit technically minded to set this up in the first place, and you would need each performer to set this up correctly as well for everybody to get the benefit. So we're probably not quite there yet, but give it a year or two, and we would probably be able to have distanced ensembles within reason. And with the within reason, this really shocked me, is that we eventually run into problems with the flipping speed of light. Okay, so the speed of light is really fast. It's really fast enough for most of my everyday uses, but it turns out that the Earth is also really big. So if we worked out the time it would take any signal traveling at the speed of light, and it can't travel faster, to get from here to Australia, it works out as 15 million meters divided by 300 million meters per second. And Robert, I know you've already done this in your head, and that is 50 milliseconds. So that's already over the time that we ideally want to have in order to play live together. So I'm sort of slightly sad that no amount of tech is going to make it possible for the six continents orchestra to play together at least comfortably. They might have to play slightly ahead in order to stay together. And I mentioned that Zoom was performing one last little miracle, and this is it. It's making the tough call all the time as to how long to wait for the last package to arrive. Because I mentioned that all of these packages of sound are taking different lengths of time to get from my house to yours. In fact, some of them don't get there at all. They get lost along the way. And in which case, does Zoom wait? Does it add to the latency in order to, make sure it gets as many packages as possible? Or does it just plow ahead regardless? So it could plow ahead regardless and leave little silences. Little silences are very noticeable, sometimes a little clicky. I was considering lip syncing to that, but I decided not to even try. Hopefully you got the point that little silences are quite unpleasant to our ears. So Zoom and other companies do their best often to fill in any gaps, just so they can keep the latency as low as possible while not annoying you with these gaps. For example, sometimes it's better to repeat the last package just to fill a gap. Okay, so you've probably heard that kind of glitchy sound before. And so yes, don't blame Zoom too much. It is kindly trying to fill a gap. The internet has let it down and it's trying to cover for it in the most effective way. So that's just a sign that the bandwidth is a bit too limited. So I said I would round up with some audio hygiene tips, and I don't want to make you paranoid. These aren't really aimed at you. This is more something that you could passive aggressively send to friends and colleagues if their audio is terrible during a meeting. I guess rule number one is don't even risk those echoes. Even if you don't have echoes, you'll make Zoom work really hard to avoid giving the echoes. And that could mess up the sound in ways that aren't so obvious. So just, if at all possible, wear headphones. I think most people wouldn't like to be wearing headphones for a long period of time, and they wouldn't feel so comfortable performing or singing or talking while wearing headphones. If that's you, then it sounds like you need to get yourself a pair of open headphones. So most headphones are closed in the sense that they try and block out all the sound from around you, which is normally what we want. But in this kind of setting, it's actually much nicer to let your ears breathe. And it partly just means that your own voice doesn't sound so enclosed in your own head. They make a real acoustical difference to how your own voice sounds. So open headphones, you can get a pair for about 40 quid. That'll be a lot more comfortable to wear and to talk in for a long period of time. Perhaps you don't have them. Perhaps that's above your price range. If you're in a big meeting and you're not talking too much, then mute yourself, and then you can't create echoes. And if you need to be more interactive than that, then don't blast out your sound, because that could lead to distortions that could make echoes worse. So you want to be able to hear what the person's saying, but don't make it too much louder than is needed in order to be able to hear them if you're not using headphones or if you're not muted. So these are decisions we can make. These are trade-offs we can make that all help Zoom. This may be easier said than done, but if you want to avoid adding unnecessary noise, be somewhere quiet if you can. Ironically, I've chosen the room that's right next to the road, and some of you may live next to dual carriageway and you don't have the option. But if you do have the option, just be somewhere quiet, I suppose. And either way, I'd really recommend getting an external microphone. I'm currently using a USB mic that cost 14 quid. So you don't have to spend big bucks to have an external microphone that will be immeasurably better than one that's built into your laptop, for example. If nothing else, it is pointed directly at me, so it's picking up less of the road noise, less of the potentially dog barking and that kind of stuff. And as I say, I don't want to recommend doing things that not everybody can afford, but it's kind of, if you can afford it, it's worth saying that it's worth paying for a decent bandwidth. Um, Zoom said about 2 megabits per second is what it needs for most purposes, maybe a bit more if you're being a bit advanced. But in order to get that reliably, you might have to pay for 10 megabits per second or more. Whatever your bandwidth is, it may be worth plugging in your computer directly and using Ethernet rather than the Wi-Fi. And again, that's not possible for everyone. If you're stuck using your Wi-Fi, you can experiment with getting nearer your router. So if you can be in the same room as your router, the closer the better. That can increase your bandwidth and reduce your latency. Simple but effective. Again, ironically, my router is way over there, and if anybody uses the microwave, you're going to lose me for half of a minute. But yes, so generally trying to increase your bandwidth if you can. You can test this with speed tests on the internet. You can easily search for them and try different positions and see which is best for you. And generally, again, this could cost the big bucks, but using good equipment sometimes helps. So if you're using a 10-year-old laptop, its echo cancellation might not be as good. Using an external mic is good. If you have to use loudspeakers, then higher quality ones will distort less. So they will help prevent echoes and the like. And if you're just talking like this over Zoom, then that may be all you need. But if you want to try singing, having a music lesson over Zoom, then you might want to go a bit further, in which case it gets a bit more complicated. For starters, you can uncheck the option to automatically adjust the microphone hidden in the audio settings. And then you've got to take the responsibility yourself, ideally with a friend who can tell you what levels work best and what distance works best. And also, it's particularly important that you do all of the above here. So all of these tips particularly apply if you want to play music over the internet. And if you've done that, done as much as you can of these ones, then it's worth considering trying the high fidelity music mode. If your bandwidth's not high enough, it could make things worse rather than better. But if everything else is working well, then it's worth trying this high fidelity music mode, which is actually just designed to optimize Zoom's decision making for music rather than speech. And if you've got this far, then you could even risk taking off the echo cancellation option. If you're wearing headphones, there's no echoes to cancel, so you could have just a slightly more natural audio by turning off echo cancellation. But you can see how that's a bit of a risky behavior if you haven't taken all of the other precautions as well. So I will make these slides available via my Twitter account, ear catching. Yes, I may even try and send a link on the chat, and I'll provide a handy summary of audio hygiene for you to send to your friends as well. But otherwise, that's the end of the talk, and I think.